Hi, friends. It's Don with episode number 2 of my God Stuff conversations for friends of mine who I love. You know who you are, who aren't part of my church networks. We don't necessarily share the same kind of faith background or belief system. But with everything going on with Corona, I just kind of wanted to give you insight again into how I look at the world and where I'm finding hope and comfort these days, and where I hope you can find it too. I encourage any of you watching this, if you haven't watched episode 1, Judge and Jury, please watch that first. It's kind of how I set the tone for what we're looking for: philosophical skepticism versus scientific absolute proof versus a courtroom with judge and jury. And I think it'll be really helpful before you do that. Today is called Running in Circles. I almost called it the Headless Chicken Dance, but I decided against it. I grew up with a grandpa who had a chicken ranch in Delaware, and he'd have 20 to 40,000 chickens on his ranch at any given time. And like some of you, I was a very tender-hearted young man, and I would refuse to eat any chicken that came from his ranch. I was there one time on vacation when they delivered whatever it was, 20, 30,000 of these fuzzy little yellow chicks, and I fell in love. And so from then on, I would not eat chicken at Grandma and Grandpa's unless they showed me the wrapper that proved that they bought it at the store and that it was a different brand of chicken than he raised chickens for. Little did I know they reused that wrapper many times over the years. Generally speaking, a man with 40,000 chickens in his backyard doesn't go pay retail for chicken very often. But because of that, I missed out on one of those boyhood rites of passage that my older brother and my younger brother were part of, the Headless Chicken Dance, when they would process some chickens to put in the freezer and stuff like that. You behead the chicken and it goes running around in circles, this big frantic burst of energy, and this chicken just takes off running, but it's just going in circles all over the place. Well, this is going to be a little insulting, sorry, but sometimes I think even those of us who are educated as theologians or as scientists or as philosophers, even we're in danger of running around in circles sometimes, let alone everybody who's listening to our arguments or our thought process and not necessarily hearing it well. And when I mean running around in circles, what I really mean is we use circular arguments. Now, a circular argument is any argument that is kind of creates its own conclusion, right? It creates its own outcome. So if you accept the premises, the conclusion's already guaranteed. And we do that a lot more often than we think we do. And it's kind of hard to catch when you're only looking at your own arguments. And when somebody else points it out to you, it can be pretty uncomfortable. So let me start with my Christian background and my Christian friends, and hopefully you can see this. I can start this argument by saying the Bible is true. It is reliable. It is God's word. It is without error. We can count on whatever it says is true. And the Bible says that Jesus rose from the dead. So we can take that to the bank. Jesus actually rose from the dead. And because Jesus rose from the dead, we know that Jesus is God, that he is God's son and he is fully God. And that's the basis of our faith in Christianity. And because Jesus is God and he told us the Bible is true, we know that the Bible is true and without error. And you can see how that can become a circular argument that you can start anywhere you want. But the reality is you've set the terms in such a way that you've made the argument be true simply by the way that you framed the terms. Christian friends, sorry if I just made you really uncomfortable with that. A lot of you, this has been the basis for your faith in God and you didn't even know it. And later I'm going to talk about this more. So if I've caused you to panic, hang on for a little while and listen to the next episode too. Friends in philosophy, I'm not even going to mess with you because you can say things like, how do you even know it's a circular argument, not a square, and prove it, and why? And, philosophical debate can go on and on. Let me pull out science, though, for a second, and let me make some of my friends in the scientific community uncomfortable. When we talk about science, we very quickly put a box around what is and what is not science, right? And rightly so. So astronomy is science. Astrology is not science. Epistemology is not science. That's philosophy, whereas epidemiology is science. Physics is science. Theology is not science. We have this box. And for it to be good science, you have to be able to quantify it, calculate it, measure it. Ideally, you want to be able to isolate it, control the variables, do repeated tests to test hypotheses. Hypotheses become theories. Theories become accepted as fact. It's a very rigid, stringent approach to science that from the very beginning says only things that are quantifiable and physical are allowed in the box to be part of science. If you give a metaphysical answer to a science question, it's immediately discarded, right? You can't go to some kind of scientific discussion and say, God did it. They're like, that doesn't fit in the box, right? Get out of here. God is metaphysical. We study physical, natural, measurable things when we do our science and when we come up with our conclusions. That's all fair and good. And let me be really clear. I'm pro-science. I'm not one of these, I don't want to make fun of people too much, but I'm not one of these theologians or pastors that acts like science is evil and theology is good. My mom and dad were in the medical profession. My son is a doctor. I care a lot about science and what it does for us and to improve our quality of life. And in fact, I see a rich history and harmony between a Christian worldview and theology and the development and rise of science in the Western civilization in particular. Don't get me started on that. That's for a whole nother day. But here's the problem. The problem is when we start by saying only physical, natural, measurable can be in the box, metaphysical's out, and then we go through all of our rigors of scientific testing. I'm going in a circle, you can't see it. And then we come back and we come to conclusions like there's no God. Or see, we can explain the existence of humanity without God, so we can say there is no God. Or we can explain the origins of the universe without God, so there is no God. When in reality, you haven't really fully explained them anyway. You've only chased that clue trail of cause and effect back as far as you can go till you find what you consider the ultimate cause. But my point for today is you ruled God out at the beginning. So you don't get to go through all the exercises and then come back and say, see, we've proved there is no God. Well, you started there. That's a circular argument for the scientific community as well. Now, I know a lot of scientists work really hard to avoid that. I'm making things sound a little simplistic today. That's kind of the nature of doing a video blog. Plus, I'm not a scientist. I can't argue science, fact for fact, detail for detail, observation for observation with any good scientist. I would go so far as to say you can't argue the Bible with me. I would just put you down and beat you senseless. I'm really good with the Bible stuff. I'm not so great with the science stuff. But anyway, back to what we believe and why we believe it. We got to watch out for circular arguments. We got to watch out for believing something and being persuaded and convinced it's true simply because we've made a self-looping argument that really doesn't deal with reality or isn't really persuasive to other people. So one of the things we can do to try to avoid that is play devil's advocate with ourselves. Christians, let me start with you again. One of the guys on our staff here at our church, his name's Nick, he came out of an atheist background and became a follower of Christ as a late teenager. He's a very intellectual guy, very intelligent. One of the things that he still enjoys doing is engaging the best arguments he can find from thinkers who are atheist in their worldview. And he loves to hear their lectures and read their books, or he probably listens to their podcasts and audiobooks more than reads them. But he loves to engage the best thought he can find, because his thinking is, if I'm wrong, I'd rather know it now. And so he plays devil's advocate with himself all the time. Just took our young adults through something he calls atheism for Lent, where in the time working up to Passover, you consider all of these atheist arguments and God is dead and all of that stuff. For me, it's things like The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins or other articles or whatever I can find. I want to be challenged in my view of the world. I want to see where some of my arguments don't hold water. I want to be the first to admit I can't philosophically prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that my faith is true. I can't scientifically prove that my faith is true. I'm just telling you, I find it the most persuasive way to see the world and understand all of the evidence I've encountered when I'm the judge who's permitting the evidence and I'm the jury who's evaluating it. It really makes the most sense to me. So those of you who are not followers of Christ, who don't hold a Christian worldview, let me give you a couple recommendations. One's called The Reason for God by Tim Keller. These are recommendations without knowing any particular issue or struggle you would have. This is probably the most basic introduction and well thought out introduction from a very intelligent guy who's very well spoken and not super dogmatic or anything like that. I really like that book. Different one is called Why Believe by C. Stephen Evans. You'll find that he's influenced my thinking a lot in terms of the subtitle is Reason and Mystery as pointers to God. The fact that we can't always know everything that we want to know, and yet we ultimately have to make a decision how we're going to lead our lives and what we're going to do with it. So here's where I'm ending today. My next cast episode, whatever you call these conversations, I'm going to lay out, at least as well as I can, what I would call a near circular argument. It's going to sound kind of similar to what I talked about from what Christians view as to why they believe in God. I can't find my little piece of paper. It was going to blow away. It's going to look similar to that, but it's different in some ways that to me are very significant, very important to me in terms of why I don't think it's a circular argument and why I think it makes the most sense and why I think it's the only way that I can actually feel like I can say I know anything about the world. And again, using the word know not as I can prove it without any philosophical doubt, or I can prove it as a scientific fact that is irrefutable in a laboratory, but I know it in the sense that I am so persuaded by it that it's the basis on which I'm going to live my life and make my decisions, even the basis on which I'm going to view death and make my decisions as it involves that. So that's the next episode coming. I hope you'll want to hear it, and I hope you'll start some good conversation with me about it. Love you guys. Miss you guys. I pray for you all the time. Wish God's blessing on you in this uncertain time. See ya.